Hello, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. Welcome back to CBSN. The United States is grappling with a growing number of mass shootings nationwide. The latest tragedy happened Thursday night at a FedEx facility in Indianapolis. Police say a gunman murdered 8 people and wounded 5 others before taking his own life. Officials say they're still trying to determine a motive. According to the Gun Violence Archive, this marks the nation's 147th mass shooting this year. In recent weeks, the president announced new gun control measures, but many fear there's no end to the violence in sight. Several organizations are trying to stop that. One of them is Everytown for Gun Safety. The organization recently hosted a 10-day road trip across the country. The bipartisan coalition traveled from all corners of the map, meeting with lawmakers to push legislation for background checks. Shannon Watts is the founder of Moms Demand Action. She joins me now from Oakland, California. Shannon, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Before we discuss your cross-country journey, I'd like to begin with last night's shooting in Indianapolis. It is the 5th mass shooting in the city this year. What action do you think needs to be taken to prevent these types of incidents from occurring in the future?
Well, first of all, our hearts go out to the victims and the survivors of this horrific shooting, which just seems to be endless, that we wake up every day in this country and see another mass shooting. And it's important that we talk about gun violence when these shootings happen, but we also have to remember this crisis never went away. Even though mass shootings slowed down during the pandemic, 2020 was one of the worst years for gun violence in this country on record. And that's because everyday gun violence, whether it's gun suicides or gun homicides or domestic gun violence, is really tearing at the fabric of our communities. And I also think what's so important to remember about this shooting in Indianapolis is we are all only as safe as the closest state with the weakest gun laws. Indiana has incredibly lax gun laws. There is absolutely no permit, training, background check required to buy a semi-automatic rifle and open carry it in public. And, I lived in Indiana for many years. It's just a short drive to the border of Illinois. And we know that 20% of the crime guns we find in Chicago actually come from the state of Indiana because they're so easy to traffic due to lax gun laws.
You make a great point about your safety only being as secure as the state, that is your neighbor. Your organization, Moms Demand Action, was part of the bipartisan group that road tripped across the country lobbying for the Senate to pass background check legislation. Tell us a bit more about your journey and why you believe that now is the time to enact more comprehensive gun laws in the U.S.
Well, in addition to this horrific gun violence crisis we're experiencing, gun violence is really an epidemic within a pandemic. We know COVID is exacerbating gun violence, but even beforehand, 40,000 Americans were shot and killed every single year in this country, many, many more wounded. And we should have acted a long time ago, frankly. We have to act now. We have a president who has campaigned on this issue and has made it a policy priority. We have a House and Senate majority that are what we call gun sense champions. And so really time is of the essence when 100 Americans are killed every single day. This road trip we went on, we made over 70 COVID safe stops. It was really a relay race passing these banners and letters, eventually from Alaska all the way to DC. I was in Washington, DC yesterday to deliver those letters by hand to Senators Murphy and Blumenthal. But we have got to pass common sense gun safety legislation in this country. We have a 25 times higher gun homicide rate than any of our peer nations. And the reason for that is easy, unregulated access to guns. This is not about being anti-gun. It's simply about restoring the responsibilities that need to go along with gun rights.
Now, you mentioned that your coalition is bipartisan. It includes Republicans, gun owners. How did you manage to create such a diverse coalition when it comes to background checks and any kind of gun legislation? Because we know how polarizing this issue is in the U.S.
Well, it's interesting. I would push back and argue that it actually isn't polarizing. 90% of Americans support common sense gun laws like a background check on every gun sale. 89% of gun owners 87% of Republicans. That's according to recent polling. I'm not sure there's another issue in America that has more consensus than this one does. The only place where gun safety seems to be polarizing is in the U.S. Senate. And so that's why it's on every American to get off the sidelines and to demand that their senators act. Legislation is passed through the House, very moderate, bipartisan legislation that would simply close loopholes in our laws that allow dangerous people to have access to guns. And it really is time for the Senate to act. It's been over 25 years since Congress has passed meaningful gun safety legislation in this country.
And of course, as you pointed out, coronavirus-related lockdowns did not stop gun violence from surging. In 2020, homicides were up nearly 30% in more than 30 cities across the U.S. And according to the Gun Violence Archive, more than 19,000 people died from gun violence in the last year. And now that violence, of course, is bleeding into 2021. Since January 1st, gun violence has killed more than 5,000 people nationwide, and the number of deaths increases by more than double if you factor into that number suicides. So how would stricter background checks impact these sorts of shocking statistics? And what would these background checks entail?
You know, I'm often asked the question after every mass shooting tragedy, what would have stopped that specific episode of gun violence? And the answer is we don't really know because we haven't tried trying. If you look at vehicle accidents in the 70s and 80s, we did a number of things. We put seatbelt laws in place. We addressed speed limits. We had rumble strips. We improved car technology. We haven't done any of those things when it comes to gun violence in this country because we have this very wealthy, powerful special interest that has prohibited anything from happening. When we look at states that have passed stronger gun laws, like a background check on every gun sale, 22 states so far have closed that loophole. We see fewer gun deaths. And we know that if we then applied those at a federal level, it would save even more lives. And so what we're looking at is requiring background checks on unlicensed sales in this country. Right now, federal law only requires background check on licensed gun sales. And again, 22 states have closed that loophole. But about a quarter of all guns sold every year in this country are sold without a background check because unlicensed dealers can do that. And so, again, it's why we have a 25 times higher gun homicide rate than any other peer nation. And it's something that needs to be closed at a federal level.
All right. Well, Shannon Watts, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your insight and your time.
Thank you.